All right, so think about a train track for a second. It just seems like, a bunch of steel bars laid end to end. Pretty simple. But what if I told you that's not really how it works? What if it's actually one single, unbroken ribbon of metal? One that can stretch across an entire continent. It sounds kind of crazy, right?
I mean, have you ever really thought about that? How can this one continuous piece of steel survive scorching hot summers and freezing cold winters without just, I don't know, buckling or snapping in half? Well, that's the puzzle we're going to unpack right now. And the first piece of that puzzle, it's all about the weld.
You see, for the longest time, the weakest part of any track, its literal Achilles heel, was the joint, that one spot where two pieces of rail met. Every single one was a ticking time bomb, a potential point of failure. If you mess that up, the constant immense stress from trains passing over, day after day, could lead to disaster. We're talking cracks, fractures, catastrophic stuff.
So, the old way of doing things was called thermite welding. You can think of it like using a super strong, super hot glue. Basically, a chemical reaction would pour molten metal into the gap between the rails. The problem is this created what's called an inhomogeneous weld. The new filler material just wasn't the same as the rail itself. It had a different structure, it cooled down differently. This made weak spots. It created these little dipped joints that would wear down over time. And that's actually where that classic clack-clack sound of a train comes from. It was literally the sound of the train hammering the track's weak point. But the modern way, flash butt welding, it's a total game changer. It uses no filler material at all. And the result? A weld that is just as strong as the original rail, no weak spots. So how on earth does that work? Fusing steel without adding any extra metal? Well, it's a process that is so incredibly powerful, so fast it's basically like welding with a bolt of lightning. Okay, let's break this down. First, you take the two ends of the rail and you blast a massive electric current through them. We're talking enough juice to heat that solid steel right up to its melting point. As they get closer, all the impurities on the surface just burn away in this incredible shower of sparks. Then comes the main event, the upset stroke. The two molten ends are slammed together with just immense force. And finally, while it's still hot, a blade comes in and instantly shears off any excess metal, leaving a perfectly smooth joint. And here's the really cool part, the magic of it, really. Because no new material was added, the steel's own internal crystal structure, that lattice that gives it its strength, it just reforms across the gap as it cools down. So the weld isn't really a weld anymore. It's just rail. The weak point is just gone, completely eliminated. Of course, this tech didn't just appear overnight. It's evolved like crazy. Back in 1973, the first mobile machines that could automate the welding part were a huge deal, a massive leap forward. But fast forward to today, and we have these incredible full-blown robots like the APT-1500R. We're talking machines that handle the entire process, from lining up the rails perfectly to doing the weld itself, all with almost no human help. Okay, so problem solved, right? We've got a perfect weld. We can make a seamless rail that stretches from coast to coast. Well, not so fast, because as soon as engineers solved the welding problem, they ran smack into a much, much bigger one, an invisible enemy that you can't just weld away: temperature. Just think about basic physics, right? When something gets hot, it expands. Now imagine a single piece of steel hundreds of miles long. On a blazing hot summer day, that entire rail is trying to get longer, but it has nowhere to go. It's locked in place. So all that incredible compressive force builds up and up until, bang. The track can literally warp and buckle into these S-curves. It's an enormous derailment risk. And then in the dead of winter, you have the exact opposite problem. The steel gets cold and it wants to shrink, to contract. This creates a massive pulling force, tensile force. And if that tension gets too high, the rail can just snap in two. A clean break. So you've got this impossible problem. How do you build a track that's safe when it's trying to tear itself apart and when it's trying to crush itself? The answer, and this is pretty brilliant, is a concept called neutral temperature. You can think of it as the rail's happy place. It's the one specific temperature, let's say 25 degrees Celsius for this example, where the steel is perfectly relaxed. It's not trying to expand, it's not trying to contract, it's just chill. So the whole goal of building a modern track is to install the rail so that this relaxed, neutral state is right in the sweet spot of the local climate's temperature swings. Okay, but here's the catch. You can't just wait around for the perfect 25-degree day to build your track, right? That's not how the real world works. So engineers came up with this incredibly clever solution. If you can't control the temperature, you just trick the steel into thinking it's the right temperature.
So this really is the key question. Let's say you're installing the track and it's a cool 10 degrees outside. You know that at that temperature, the rail is naturally going to be shorter than it would be at its ideal 25-degree neutral temperature. So, what do? How do you possibly close that gap?
All right, let's actually look at the numbers, because this is where it gets really interesting. Let's take a 360-meter section of rail. Our goal is for it to be exactly that long when it's at that happy place temp of 25 degrees. But today, the day we're installing it, it's only 10 degrees. So basic physics tells us that piece of steel is going to be about 6 centimeters shorter than we want. But hold on, remember, you're joining two of these sections together, so each end has shrunk by 6 centimeters. That means the total gap you're trying to weld shut isn't 6 centimeters, it's 12. That's a pretty big gap to close in solid steel.
And obviously, you can't just fill a 12-centimeter gap with weld, so the answer is kind of mind-blowing. You physically pull the rails and stretch them. You stretch them until they are the exact length they should be at that 25-degree neutral temperature. This is called pre-stressing, and it basically builds in the right amount of tension from day one, so the track stays stable no matter what the weather does.
So you're probably wondering, how much force does it take to stretch solid steel? Well, a lot. We're talking about 1,500 kilonewtons. To put that in perspective, that's like hanging more than 150 tons from the end of the rail. That's the weight of like 10 city buses. Just think about that. And where does all that incredible power come from? Yep, from that same robot we were talking about earlier.
And this is really what makes that APT-1500R robot such a revolutionary piece of equipment. It's the first machine in the world that can do this whole dance all by itself. It doesn't need a separate pulling machine. It aligns the rails perfectly. It pulls with that insane 1,500 kilonewton force to pre-stress them. It does the flash butt weld. And then, this is key, it holds everything perfectly in place until the weld cools and that stress is locked in for good. It's a one-stop shop for a perfect track.
So when you put it all together, what do you have? You have the perfect weld, combined with precise, calculated pre-stressing. And the result is a single, continuous track that is already prepared for the battle against temperature. It's a ribbon of steel that's been completely tamed, ready for the hottest summer days and the coldest winter nights. I mean, it's just an amazing fusion of pure brute force and incredibly delicate physics, isn't it? And it kind of makes you look around and wonder, what other invisible forces like this are being quietly tamed by brilliant engineering all around us, every single day, completely hidden in plain sight?